here is one of the biggest tricks and mechanisms that the ego mind uses to maintain itself. The ego mind, and generally just in general, even more broadly, your mind is constructing all of reality. But in order for it to feel like it's real and not a construction, you have to be unconscious about the fact that you're constructing reality. You have to deny it. So the mind, as it's constructing, it immediately begins constructing constructions that deny construction is occurring. And you have many of these constructions in your mind. And so when I'm communicating with you, the reason it can take so long and it can be so challenging and it requires so much in-depth explanation is because I'm not dealing with a blank slate. Your mind is already full of 20 or 30 or 50 years of constructions and programming from your culture and your society. And you don't even know that that's there. I mean, you know it's there in the abstract sense, but you don't know the full detail of it and the full extent of it. If you did, it would make you vomit immediately. You would be disgusted with yourself. You would have an existential crisis. So you have all these defense mechanisms against acknowledging and admitting and even seeing the construction process occurring. And you don't even know what these defense mechanisms are. I do know what they are because I've studied them for years within myself and within others. And so I'm trying to share some of them with you. The problem that is, though, that you're playing this game of construction. Therefore, the most threatening thing to you is any kind of deconstruction. Therefore, if what I'm teaching is mostly deconstruction, which is what I teach, then your mind is going to be very resistant to that, and you're going to have the full power of your and intelligence of your mind is going to be devoted towards preventing the deconstruction from happening. And so one of the ways that the mind creates a very solid construction such that it feels so real that most people can't even begin to entertain the idea that they're constructing this whole thing right here. It's like, Leo, my mind is not constructing reality. What are you talking about? If I was constructing reality, how come I constructed this shitty life? Well, precisely because you're constructing it unconsciously. But Leo, if I'm constructing reality, how come I don't look so beautiful? How come I look ugly? Well, you believe you look ugly. That's something you constructed. You don't see your own beauty. Because society has created constructions that you adopted unconsciously as to what beauty is. And now you're operating on those constructions without even realizing it. So you can't even see your own beauty. So you see, anyways, the way the mind creates this very lifelike construction is simply through sheer quantity. It's not just a couple of constructions. It's a construction wrapped inside of more constructions, wrapped inside of more constructions, inside of more constructions, and it's just this never-ending twisted tangle of thousands of constructions, all buttressing each other, creating a sort of structure that seems to hold. It's really a house of cards, but you can find some pictures and videos of people creating some amazing houses of cards. Look it up on YouTube. You can find some like masterful houses of cards being built, and they look very stable and they look very impressive. But that's because every card is supporting every other card in this way, such that it creates a sort of a sense of integrity, but it's not really integrity. It's a fiction. It's a fantasy. In the same way that if you want to write a really good novel, sci-fi or fantasy, what do you need to write a really compelling novel that draws you in and is so lifelike and is so immersive that you just get lost in it for weeks? You forget that you even have a normal life. You stop going to work, you stop seeing your children, you stop having sex because this novel is just so engrossing you can't stop until you finish it. How do you do that as a writer? A lot of detail. A lot of juicy detail. You're constructing an entire world, the sort of Lord of the Rings world, let's say, where you have all these different creatures and monsters and people and characters, and they're doing things, and it's dramatic and it's interesting and it's all interconnected, and you can draw connections between like, oh, this person is related to that person, and he came from, he was the son and daughter of this person there, and this, and then you build backstory and future stories, and then you do, backwards projections, future projections, flashbacks and flash forwards, and you combine all this stuff together, and it becomes as though it's its own world. And then to deconstruct that becomes very challenging. Because see, like, let's say I say, oh, well, let's say you're really into Lord of the Rings or something, and I come to you and say, oh, but Frodo is just a character. He's just a fictional character. And you say, no, he's not. What are you talking about, Leo? Frodo is so real. He has parents. I can name you his parents. His mom was so-and-so, and his dad was so-and-so. And I say, yeah, but that's still part of a story. And you say, well, no, it's not part of a story. Lord of the Rings has this like entire continent and world, like Middle Earth. It's an actual place. I don't know what it is. It's a planet or something. I'm not familiar very deeply with the Lord of the Rings lore, but you can. I'm sure there's a deep lore there. You can kind of go deeper and deeper into the lore. And in fact, there's probably a bunch of fan fiction lore, even on top of what was written in the books. Because people go wild with this stuff and they just start inventing stuff. They probably have invented the name for Frodo's mother and father and where she came from and where he came from and how they met and how they had sex and all this and where they're living and where Middle Earth came from, what it was, evolution was, its entire history. And see, when I start to try to deconstruct for you, Frodo, you're going to drag in the entire fiction of the Lord of the Rings universe. And you're going to keep pointing to every fiction in there to explain why Frodo is real. You're going to say the world is real, and I say, no, the world is not real. You say, but it is because people eat and people shit and people die, so it's a real world. But I say, but that's fictional. And you say, no, but it's not fictional. I read about, this character here, he died, and then that character there was born, and then this happened there, and this happened there, and there's a rich history of it. And I say, yeah, but that's all stories. And you say, no, it's not stories. Because you're so bought into it. Because it feels so lifelike. You say there's trees and there's rocks and there's mountains and there's cities and they have names and it's so lifelike. There's politics going on and there's a battle between good and evil and this and that. And this is what Game of Thrones did so well. Perhaps an even better example than Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings actually isn't that realistic. Whereas Game of Thrones really took Lord of the Rings and it made it so politically realistic and so kind of brutal and bloody. And you can imagine living in that world. And people do, and that's the whole appeal of this kind of fantasy stuff. The mind loves imagination. That's because it's constructing everything. Imagination is the only business that the universe is in. There's no other business in town. Reality is imagination. Various gradations of it. You're imagining this whole thing right now.